And I am back. Don't think I'm going to be doing any notifications for this. I'm just kind of wanting to chill and watch this, and other people can watch too. So, without much of a further ado, I will hit play. Well, I guess I'll say a few words before. Um, I watched the Richard Wolf versus Destiny debate, and that was like a train wreck. And I mean, if you know me, you know I'm a pretty big fan of Sam Seder. I think he does like great work. Whatever he takes down people as like he took down Steven Crowder, like that was a great video. And the the debate between him and Yaron Brooks recently is also pretty telling of like the kind of like psychopaths these like big brain libertarians are. They're like they want to put everything, all consequences on the individual. And Destiny's not a libertarian. He's like, I don't know what he is. He claims to be like a leftist or whatever, or he has in the past, a or a social democrat or whatever. But he has some pretty weird takes on stuff. And I haven't watched this, but I'm pretty interested in how Sam is going to react to Destiny's bullshit. But without any further ado, I will hit play.
Everybody on my fan base knows who you are, but if you want, you can introduce yourself just for people that might not go for it.
My name is Sam Cedar. Hello. Nice to see you all.
Gotcha. I'm Steven, aka Destiny, whatever. People know me from Politics
Make sure
Online.
my audio
All
is
right.
alright.
I've been a big fan of yours for a long time.
Yeah, it's
We've
too
talked in
loud,
the
man.
past on a podcast. I'm not a fan, however, of the Majority Report because I think that a lot of your conversations go significantly left of where I would take them. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was student loan debt and like debt forgiveness because it's like a really hot topic in a lot of the online kind of world today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to that. To be honest with you, like I was, I mean, forgive
Okay,
me,
I
I
mean
don't
that's just
watch
gonna
a
have to be
lot of
it
other
for my
shows.
audio.
I
I think
imagine you don't have a lot of time to do that yourself.
Yeah.
Um, and so
got
I
a little
was a
hot.
little bit surprised that that's what you wanted to like. I guess my assumption has been that you would be for it. So I'm interested to find out what the issue would be. I think maybe just from a really super broad strokes perspective, I mean, maybe if
I
we
got
can
popcorn.
start with the premise of what we want out of public policy,
Mm-hmm.
just as a watershed to sort of assess it from that perspective.
I,
Um,
I think from a broader point of view, if we were to back up and look at like education and what is the government's responsibility in education, I'm pretty sure that we would probably 100% agree on that. So like, I don't think that cost should ever be a prohibitive factor for people deciding to go to school. It seems like across most of Europe, that results in like highly subsidized education, or if you don't have the means to pay for it, completely free education. Um, we we might quibble over like should it be universally free versus should it be like I guess means tested free or whatever. But I'm pretty sure that you and I probably agree relatively similarly on that. That you should there should never ever be a single kid that wants to go to college but he has to make the decision not to because he either can't afford to go or can't afford to not work while going.
Okay, so far seems like pretty principled take on student loan debt, but let's see how let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
right, right. And I mean, I think, the best way to achieve that would be like a free option state colleges,
Sure.
as we call them now. Maybe they would have to be federally funded, where you would have the option, the ability to go to that college for free. There's some people I've actually interviewed professors who were concerned about the idea that we would be paying for someone to, a free college to go to every college that is out there, and that's not what that idea would be. It would be to make sure that everybody has that option and that opportunity to go to college for free. But broadly speaking, too, I mean, I think even more broadly beyond education, the idea is that we want
Is there wait, real
policy-
quick? Is there a way that you can boost your microphone just a little? I can't see a way to do it on.
Oh, wait, by the way, this is going to be a rare view of, like, the opposite sides, like, chat stream, so that's going to be interesting, seeing, like, all the negative Sam stuff.
I don't want to sound like I'm screaming over you or anything.
How about this?
Yep, perfect, great.
Is that better?
Yep. Okay, go for it.
And then broadly speaking, I think that
Sam was kind
for
of low.
me, the way that I assess a policy is that it helps. I mean, I tend to like universality in policies because I think it makes them more durable. I also think that often means testing ends up being super inefficient if the idea is to save money on policies like that. But from a political standpoint, I think they're also much more durable. I also, I think the idea behind, for me, for forgiving college debt is that it's going to free up a lot of people to make decisions that they wouldn't otherwise make. I don't think that the government should be in the business of making money. I mean, we both agree that the government should provide an option of free college to be making money off of college loans. I think also that we've seen the debt itself, just in terms of like what the drag that it acts on the economy, I think is highly problematic. And in addition to that, although you could probably deal with this through a change in bankruptcy law, it's very, very, very difficult to discharge this debt. And so broadly speaking, I mean, those are my principles. But even I think there are other sort of subsets of that, which make this college debt even more problematic in my mind.
Gotcha. So, so there's a lot of different places to go with this. So we start off on the common ground that I think that we agree that college should be free or heavily subsidized. I'm never going to fight on that in terms of like somebody wants to make it universal versus means tested. Either way would be way better than what we have now, I think, in terms of making it more accessible for everybody. So the part that I kind of like lose people is that where I lose people is that when we start to have broader conversations about like student loan debt and its impact on people that have that debt, when you talk about people that actually have degrees, I'm going to make a really extreme claim here. I think that the quote unquote student loan debt crisis, I think, is almost entirely fabricated. I feel.
Wait, what? You think the student loan debt is fabricated? Wow, that's interesting.
Feel like it's a hot talking point literally only because the vast majority of people that engage in online political discourse tend to be younger college graduates. So things like student debt forgiveness, like it speaks to them a lot because a lot of these people carry student loan debt. But when I look at like people that have debt and have graduated with a degree, like these people are massively out owning their high school graduate counterparts. These people are like, if we were to do any type of student debt forgiveness, it would be like a massively regressive distribution of wealth to people that are already going to be the highest earners in society. It's going to be one of those issues where, unfortunately, we have like limited government and political will to get things done. So it's just going to be a ding that you have to kind of like argue and fight for, that maybe there are better areas in society where the money could go towards. I don't think that student loan debt is like as much a drag as people say that it is. Like, I mean, it is kind of a drag, but literally all debt is a drag. Like, you could forgive all credit card debt or forgive any type of debt and it would be less of a drag. But I think that in terms of like, if we wanted to give away like $1 trillion to society, I think it would be so much better to focus that on like working class people, or focus that like from a more bottom up approach, rather than like targeting what are going to be like the highest and most successful people in society anyway, basically, is kind of what I'm looking at.
Let's separate the political question for a moment, okay?
Sure.
I mean, because I think that there's definitely some arguments, regarding how it plays out politically, and that sometimes can be very hypothetical. If you had told me, 4 years ago that the Democrats could be on the verge
I
of
can't even really
passing
tell what's going on
$4
in
trillion
chat.
worth of infrastructure spending, with the Republicans, complaining about critical race theories in kindergarten, I would be shocked.
Yeah.
So it's sort of hard to predict that.
Mhm.
But I think your perspective of who will receive the benefit of this is wrong, and the idea that it's regressive is also wrong. I mean, I think my sense is, just from what you've just said, in terms of that it's actually you have been blinded by the online discourse of it, in terms of who you think is the receiver of this debt. Part of that, I think, is a function of the studies that came out in
There's also somebody say, get this man some uppers. And Sam is kind of talking slow.
in 2020 that showed that it was regressive when they looked at income,
Mhm.
and just the idea of looking at people about what they're going to make, and also a function of those studies as to what they actually looked at, I think has created some inaccurate perceptions. There was a study that just came out a month or two ago, I think it was, from the Roosevelt Institute,
Mhm.
by a couple of Princeton professors and a couple of professors from the University of California, I think it was, Merced.
Mhm.
And I have it here somewhere. And if you
What was
look
that?
at wealth as opposed to household wealth, as opposed to income,
Mhm.
you will find, and if you break it down in terms of race, you will find that this is actually incredibly progressive, and it's in fact more progressive the more debt that you relieve. The studies that were released had some serious methodological, you could say, flaws, unless you were trying to get to a certain conclusion. But if you look at things like wealth, and you look at actually who holds the majority of this debt,
Mhm.
you'll find that it's actually not, Brooklyn hipsters online. It's actually there's a huge percentage of this debt that's held by African Americans. Black people have much more difficulty in paying off this debt than white people and Asian people. In fact, I did an interview with a guy, with one of the professors of this, a guy named Wary, Frederick Wary, and it was pretty shocking, I have to say, because on some level I wasn't as concerned with the regressive nature as you might be, but I think I had a perception that was maybe somewhat similar to yours. After 20 years, white people have paid back 94% of their loans, college loans. Black student owes 95%. And a big part of this is because, and I'm sure you know that there is a serious wealth disparity. You could have, and even though we now know too from studies that similarly situated, black boys and white boys, when they get older, will, as adults, as men, will have an income disparities, even if presumably all the other factors are the same. There's such a massive wealth disparity between white people and black people in this country that, any dollar made by a white person has far less claim to it than a dollar made by a black person. So you may need to help your parents. You may need to help other members of your family. You may have more expenses insofar as that you haven't had wealth passed down. So the reality is it's actually very progressive, and it becomes more progressive the more money you forgive, in part because black people hold more debt, and low wealth families hold more debt. And the first $2,500 is deductible on your
Yeah.
taxes.
So I'm familiar with the Roosevelt study, and I feel like the methodology on this study is unbelievably flawed, like such that when I was reading it when it came out.
Okay, this is like. Okay, this seems like to be what Destiny does. Like he'll, like as a statistic or a study will be like given to him, and it's just like it seems like every time he's like, oh well, this study is just flawed for one reason or another, and that's supposed
Because
to
I've heard about how regressive debt
that's supposed to just completely invalidate what Sam is saying, I guess.
relief is, and then when they come out, I was like, well, actually, it's incredibly progressive. I was curious, like, wow, that's a much different claim than what I've heard. But the way that they try to figure this out, I can't help but feel like they just desperately want to answer the question of like, how do we make it so that we can forgive student loans and make it sound progressive when it's not. I don't know why you would ever compare wealth as opposed to earnings to figure out if debt relief was a positive or a negative. Like somebody that has, so for an example, if we were to try to target some form of stimulus to somebody, you can have a person that's 75 and graduating with $200,000 in the bank, which is pretty bad if you're retiring at 75 with $200,000 in the bank, and you can compare them to somebody that just got out of med school. And we could argue that we should be stimulating the guy that just graduated with his medical degree because he has less wealth, maybe even a negative net worth compared to the older person. Wealth is largely a function of age, and student loan debt is largely acquired in the earlier parts of your life. I have no idea why somebody would like conduct a
Yeah, like Sam's like thinking exactly what I'm thinking. This shit doesn't make sense. What he's saying.
study and argue for the progressivity of the forgiveness of student loans based on wealth, when student loan debt is literally specifically taken on at the parts of your life where you have the least amount of wealth, and the people that are the wealthiest tend to be like at the end of their lifetime of earnings. There was actually one of the researchers that were cited in that Roosevelt Institute paper, Sylvain Catherine, because I was kind of looking around because their paper was cited a lot, and they echo much the same. There's like a big Twitter thread where they kind of talk about how the problems with doing this is that wealth is always going to be correlated with age versus income and earnings, which is really what you're looking for with a degree. A degree isn't about getting wealth. You don't get a big like jackpot reward when you get a degree. You get more earnings in the future, right? The net present value of a degree is pretty high. You mentioned the wealth disparity, and that's kind of like the thing that I'm interested in when we talk about like stimulus for a society. And I think that the problem with doing like student loan forgiveness is that the biggest driver, it sounds counterintuitive. When you ask me, like, what is the biggest driver of wealth inequality in society today? You know, usually people say Jeff Bezos or landlords or evil, blah, blah, blah. One of the biggest drivers of wealth disparity is actually college diplomas. Like a college degree nets you like a $20,000 average earning increase over somebody that doesn't have a college degree. And high school wages have been relatively stagnant as college wages increase and increase and increase. And you can see this over time when you plot like median wages for college degrees versus high school earnings. So the idea that we need to do targeted stimulus to give those specific groups of people money just because currently in life their wealth is low when you'd expect their wealth to be low. That Roosevelt Institute study I thought was really, really, really bad. I don't ever see why you would like try to graph against wealth, you know, who ought to be getting any kind of stimulus when I look at it that way.
Well, the reason why, I mean, it really gets to what's the purpose of this, right? I mean, we have a massive wealth disparity problem between black and white people in this country. And we know that black people disproportionately hold student debt. We also know that they have far lower graduation rates than white and Asian people. So the idea that they're even necessarily going to that they're even going to make the money that you presume is not necessarily the case. But this is why you would look at wealth as opposed to income.
Wait, what? It looked
Because
like.
if you're measuring progressivity,
Sorry, it looked for a second. It looked like Sam. I mean, that Destiny was drinking out of like a barbecue sauce bottle, or like a ketchup bottle.
in this sense, the idea is that you want to help people who need the most help, right? And the question is, how do you measure that? If I am a black man who's 54 years old, my expenses relative to, my parents, relative to, maybe even the debt that I've had to take on because I have less of an ability to. I mean, baked into your assumption is that my income, my income potential is the same as a white person who has a degree, because the value of the degree, you need to look at race, which is why they specifically do this in this study. But every claim on my dollar is much more dramatic than it would be if I was a white person, because broad strokes, statistically speaking, because my parents don't have as much money, and so they may need more help in their retirement than they would if I was white. I mean, that's just simply the case. And so when you're measuring this progressivity, the reason why you would look at wealth in this circumstance is because it's not enough to say, what's my earning potential going to be, even though it is less with my college degree than it would be for a white person. It is because there are more claims on my dollar if I'm to live a quality of life, right? Because we're not really just talking about money. We're talking about quality of life, your ability to care for the people around you, or the need to. And so, there, that is why you would look at wealth as opposed to income, because it's really not a question of just a number, right? It's a question of what you can do with that number. And if I have more claims, statistically, I do if I'm black, because I have family members, I have parents. My responsibilities are greater to them. I don't have as much wealth in my house because it's been passed on, and my house is not worth as much, because that's just statistically the case. Um, I mean, this is a function of, I'm sure of hundreds of years of both institutional and governmental and societal issues that have created this wealth disparity. But the wealth disparity actually has real world implications, and that's why you would look at that and measure progressivity that way.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that there is wealth disparity. Absolutely. I just targeting student loan debt where a disproportionate amount of the debt is held by white people just seems like it's just going to grow that disparity. Like, I think the problem is we're looking at like trying to.
But you're looking at it, and this is one of the other things that they corrected in this methodology. You're looking at the pool of debt holders. But if you want to measure progressivity, you got to measure it across the course of the entire population. And black people represent about 13% of our population. They hold more than double than that. I think it's like 27, 28% of the student debt. And that is also a function of wealth disparity. And that's why they hold that much more debt relative to their population size. For instance, Ivy Leaguers, the amount of student debt, public student debt that is held by Ivy Leaguers is infinitesimally small. And that is because wealthy people, and I'm talking not within the pool of people who borrow money, but I'm talking in the pool of our society, of people who go to college. Wealthy people don't need loans in the way that people who don't have wealth need them. And you take out the loan based upon the wealth that you have and the wealth that your family has. And even if you project forward as to what the value of that's going to be in the future, the fact is, for a disproportionate number of those people who take loans, it's going to be less than it would be for white people. But that's the basis in which you get a loan is based on wealth. Right? I mean, not on income.
The thing I would want to ask Destiny would be, like, so what if, like, some people are gonna get out ahead, like, because of the student loan forgiveness, like, so what, like, That's not what this is about. This is about, you know, we just got out of a, well, we're still not even out of it. We just had like the terrible year of 2020 where everybody was on the verge of being, uh, evicted and stuff. So, yeah, some people might get out ahead, but there would be an overwhelming majority of people affected by it that would be, life-saving or life-changing. So what? And it's like the same kind of argument you kind of hear people complain about the made up, problem of like people abusing food stamps. Like, like, so what if some people are like, I don't care if people are abusing it. I don't care if people have like a little bit extra money for food. Like, I want people to eat. I don't think that we should have to pay for to go to college. So therefore, I don't care if like some rich people get off ahead, like on the student loan forgiveness, because a lot of poor people, way more poor people, are gonna get helped by that. Because I don't want people to have to pay for college at all. Anyway, let's continue.
So I understand that, but what I'm saying, what the problem is you're not helping to alleviate any of the problems between the class of white people and the class of black people. All you're helping is wealthy black people further themselves from poor black people, and wealthy white people further themselves from poor white people. The issue here is that, like, if we were talking about we need to do some sort of targeted stimulus to kind of close the gap between white wealth and black wealth, you would have to move outside of an area where the vast majority of the debt is being held by white people. It might be that as a percentage of the debt held compared to the number of people there are, that like maybe black people hold more. But the reality is that as if you look at the whole pool of money and we were to forgive like big chunks of that pool of money or all of that pool of money, a vastly disproportionate amount of that wealth is going back into white people as opposed to black people. I don't think that there's a problem with trying to shore up differences in wealth between the classes, between white people and black people, I'll say. But I think that that's impossible to do via just blanket forgiveness when it comes to student loans. If we were to talk about things like income-based repayment programs that are based on like the income that you're earning after school, I think that programs like this would do a way better job at targeting low-income people, which in this case oftentimes will be black workers, if they do have more claims on their dollar versus white workers. But just doing this like kind of like blanket forgiveness, I think it's like 60% of debt or whatever is held by people that are going for graduate degrees, a majority of these people of which are white. I don't think that you're ever closing gaps between white and black people by doing college education debt forgiveness. You're just growing the difference between poor black people and wealthy black people, or poor white people and wealthy white people.
That last part is not true. The fact of the matter is that this study is specifically across not the pool of borrowers. Again, it is across the entire population. So, for instance, in this report, distribution of debt cancellation under the Warren Schumer plan. They look at that because that's the most expensive one, right? That's the $50,000 one. For white persons by household asset quintile has an even more progressive downward slope than we saw for all racial groups combined. White people in households in the top 10% would receive just an average, the top 10% of wealth, would receive an average of $648 in debt cancellation per person. And the biggest benefit is for white people in the households at the bottom 20%. This is across the population, right? This is the 20 percentile of the least wealthy white people in the country would receive an average of $2,700, $2,759 in debt cancellation. White people in households in the 20th to 40th percentile, almost $4,000. So there's 6 times as much as the top 10%. People in the bottom 20% would get 4 times as much debt relief as the top 10%. And it's a similar dynamic in the context of black people. So they're not looking at the assumption that rich black people go to college and take loans versus poor black people is wrong. It's just simply not what the data shows. I mean, it's an assumption that we make. But if you look into who's going to school, it is people who are not making money, particularly in black people. Like when you look at for-profit universities, which drives a lot of this of public loan debt, you've got older black, particularly women, who are going because they have reached a threshold in their job and they think they need to go to college, to these colleges, to break through this ceiling. Very often it doesn't work out.
So,
but we're talking about who actually holds the debt.
Yeah, but again, all of this is like, and I see this on page 15 because I read over this last night. The problem is that all of this is still working on a function of household wealth, which I just think is wholly irrelevant to the conversation of student loan debt. So I could ask you a million questions related to doing stimulus, and in none of these circumstances would you ever agree that household wealth is an appropriate way to look at things. Like if let's say that I was going to means test a $5,000 stimulus check, and I could give it to a household with a wealth of $200,000 that comprises two 63-year-old senior citizens just starting to collect Social Security, or a household that has like a net value of negative $50,000, and it's a guy that just graduated with a law degree or with a PhD or a medical degree or whatever. We're never, ever, ever, ever in any other part of society looking at household wealth to determine who should be stimulated. I truly can't think of any other part of society, because you're always looking at earnings potential. You're looking at like what is their lifetime earnings potential, or what is their future earnings potential. These questions are always going to guide the conversation better
we're doing that with the child. We're doing that in some fashion with the child income tax credit, aren't we?
Absolutely. That's the exact. It's only based on income. That's how that.
No, it's also based on having a child. So it's also based upon the expenses that are associated with having a family.
Well, for the child, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I'm just talking about the broad principle here. I mean, because we don't have. The broad principle here is that the expenses associated with where you're situated have an impact as to whether you qualify for this, right? If you have kids, you get this money. If you don't have kids, you don't, because theoretically your burdens are less.
Yeah.
Well, conceptually speaking, if you have a cohort of people, in this instance, black people, who have less intergenerational wealth, and they have and the same responsibilities, the claim on each dollar, and because we're talking about something different really than actually like providing a stimulus, we're providing debt relief. The claim on each dollar, every time that dollar comes in, there's less room to build assets with it. And so if you have a lawyer who has $50,000, a white person who has $50,000 worth of debt, statistically speaking, they're going to be able to build assets far quicker than a black person exactly the same situated, because statistically speaking, that black person has far more claims on their dollar because their parents don't have money, because they don't have the assets that already begin there. I mean, that's just the reality of it.
Okay, so so firstly, to be clear with the child tax credit, the amount that you get is actually based on your adjusted gross income. Your AGI, when you file your taxes, is going to determine your...
Well, no, the primary indicator is if you have children.
It is, but then how much money you get is somebody that has a kid and files taxes, right?
That's too hot.
We have this on Who Claims We Shall or whatever, right? Is you have like a modified adjusted gross income. That's what determines the amount of payback that you get.
Yes.
Number one. Number two, so when we talk about like who has the wealth to pay for college, wealth that you have at different stages in your life, I don't think is necessarily the same. So a common argument that conservatives will use or something is like, Bernie Sanders is a millionaire, Well, why is it that when we say that like an 80-year-old or whatever is a millionaire, why does that hit a little different than if you're a millionaire like when you're 30, right? Having $1 million when you're 75 years old, or having some decent level of household wealth when you're 75, 80 years old is way different than having even a fraction of that when you're younger, because you have the ability to earn so much more going forward. Like I guess we're kind of stuck. Like there's just the current wealth that you have is just such an irrelevant thing. Like you have to factor in like age and then future earnings potential to figure out like where is the true health. Like if you want to do a more fair comparison, I think it would be like the lifetime average earnings and then the wealth at the end versus just your present wealth, because somebody that's 70 years old that has $250,000 is not going to have the same amount of money as somebody that's 32, has a law degree, or just graduated as a doctor and currently has a negative net worth because of loans they have. By the time they're in their 70s or 80s, they're going to be worth millions, tens of millions maybe, depending on their investments.
Well, exactly. But the reality is that for black people, you're just, those numbers are less, even if they have the same, even if they are similarly situated. They graduate from the same college, they have the same degree, they're going to make less. A, and B, the way that they invest, they have less opportunity. Why? Because when blacks own a home, it will increase in value at a far less, it will grow far less over the course of that person's life than white people. That's just the fact, because of the nature of, of racism and of legacy of racism.
I just want to point out that like Destiny keeps on like bringing up like millionaires and stuff, or he did just now. Is like we're not like talking about millionaires. Like I think the vast majority of the people affected by like student loan forgiveness are like gonna be making obviously like less than like 100K like a year. Not consider just like their annual, income from their job or whatever.
The ability of, so when we talk about wealth disparity, we're including those 70-year-old black people, and we're including those 70-year-old white people.
Now the AC turns back on.
That disparity exists. It exists throughout the entire age brackets, everywhere, and it doesn't even out at one point. Black people don't catch up as a broad cohort. It's just the fact of the matter, and this actually, debt forgiveness would help on some level, because it would give a greater opportunity. Because look, here's the difference. If your parents are wealthy and you need to take debt, at the end of their life, you have a better opportunity of inheriting money, which gives you less of a pressure on having to invest and build assets. B, you don't have to take care of them, so you can dedicate more of your income towards building assets, investing, doing whatever it is. You're also white. Your opportunity to buy a house and be in your parents' house is going to have more value than they would if they're black. That's why it makes a difference. Why the assumption that the wealth is going to grow over the course of those 50 years or whatever it is just, it's an assumption that is not borne out by the data. You just don't have the same opportunity to build assets, regardless of what your projected income is, because even the projected income you're talking about is, you have to disaggregate it because you're not getting the clear picture.
Not going to repeat what I just saw in chat.
I don't disagree with a lot of the things that you're saying. I think the 2007-2008 housing crisis is a really good example of a lot of like household wealth being wiped out and then being recovered in the aggregate. But when you break it down, white households recovered and a lot of black households still haven't come back from that. I don't disagree with any of that. I think that there are so many better ways. And this is actually, I guess this is kind of like the foundation of what I kind of wanted to talk about at the beginning. If we wanted to help working class communities, or even more specifically, if we wanted to help black communities, or we wanted to try to bridge the gap between white and black communities more, it feels like there are so many better ways that we could target stimulus or money to those communities. Even, I wouldn't suggest this because obviously it would be a huge political loser, but even like a black student loan debt forgiveness would be way better than what we're talking about right now, which is pumping $1 trillion into, or 1.7, I guess now, into student debt forgiveness, when so much of that is just going to white people that are already going to be earning so much more going forward, being part of the like managerial upper elite class of like 4-year degree holders in the United States.
So Destiny's literal whole argument is, oh, but rich people will get help too, so we shouldn't do it.
Well,
that's the same thing that like conservatives. That's the same argument that conservatives were using for universal college in general. Like, so, wonder what that tells you.
one, we're not talking about expending $1.7 trillion because the actual expenditure, I mean, a lot of that is interest, right? I mean, that's just accruing in interest. I mean, it's not money that we ever expended in any way. So, I mean, and now you're getting more into like the political argument of it, which I think, maybe, maybe more problematic. But, and I think that like maybe Medicare for all would be better for black people, but it's far more expensive on a I don't have necessarily a problem with that, but I don't think that this is not it's not clear to me that in the absence of Joe Biden, let's say, by executive action, saying I'm going to forgive this debt, that it's foreclosing the opportunity for anything else. I mean, I would argue that maybe on some level it could create political, momentum to actually do more. I mean, that's debatable, but I think it's debatable. At this point, I mean, the hypothetical alternative that you're talking about, I don't know what that hypothetical alternative is.
Well, I think something like income-based repayment or something like that, I think would be a way better, rather than just giving so much. It's just, I just, when I try to think of like student debt forgiveness, I guess if you're talking about like getting rid of interest or whatever, just look at like the money owed.
Who do you think is taking these loans? Do you think wealthy white people are?
Yeah, they could, sure.
Well, I mean, they could take public loans, but they're not.
All I know is that like 60% of all the student loan debt is held by white people, and it's like 25% is held by black people. Now we can fudge that and look at like household wealth to try to like massage these numbers better. But if I was to give $1 trillion back to society, I don't want 60% of that going to white people that are going to be doing just fine because they have college degrees.
Well, no,
like
but
that's
no,
just
I
so
mean,
much wasted money. Like,
White people are poor too, just so you know.
especially because you're talking about growing wealth inequality, which we are between college educated people and high school educated, and you're growing inequality between white and black people because the majority of this wealth, 60%, will be going to white people, even if like as a percentage of the race, like maybe black people getting more. Like that's just, there are just so many better ways to target stimulus to those communities than just giving white people who are already like in the upper echelon of society so much more money.
But they're not already up in the echelon. You're saying that you're anticipating that their college degree will necessarily get them there. I mean, all I can.
Yeah, like that's like a fucked up thing to say too. Like Destiny's saying that like, oh, 60% of student loan debt is held by white people, so they're just up in the upper echelon of wealth already. So yeah, that's that's like erasing some demographics. Like there's plenty of poor white folk too.
Tell you is that when you've got the president, the former president, the U.S. Association of Home Builders was saying even up by 3 or 4 years ago, the number one block to new housing starts was college debt. We're seeing this is a generation too that we're talking about now, but we're talking about now that are earning far less than people who are building these assets that you're using these numbers against. Baby boomers and Gen Xers. Their opportunity to build those assets is less, and if you're saying this is a scarcity argument, I mean, if there's something wrong in and of itself with the policy, that's one thing. But I mean, if you're saying it's a scarcity argument, I just don't see that. I mean, like I said, like the concept that we were doing a $4.5 trillion infrastructure bill, which I think could very well happen, 3 years ago, I think was sort of hard to imagine. I mean, look, let's put it this way. From a political standpoint, how much are we collecting right now in student debt?
Like, what are the monthly or what are the yearly payments to the federal government?
Yeah, like what
it's
are
about
we
$70 billion, I think.
Right now, we're collecting nothing. And we haven't collected any of it for by the time September, when this thing is up, the moratorium is up, we haven't accrued interest or collected anything in over a year and a half.
Sure.
And you hear nothing about that. And so as a political matter, I'm just not convinced that it has the salience that people says. I mean, it is, I don't think that we should do this. I'm just not convinced that there's a either or choice here. This is one of the few things that Biden will have an opportunity to do unilaterally that could have this type of impact. None of the other policies that we're talking about are something that he could do unilaterally.
Yeah,
I don't know. And so, I'm not sure I would do it now if I was him. I think I would extend the moratorium and push it into next year after the last bite at the reconciliation apple that we have. But then you're talking about a policy that he can do unilaterally, and I don't know what else could have that stimulative effect. Also, the help in terms of allowing a black middle class to gain some ground in terms of the wealth disparity and the creation and expansion of a black middle class. Because I think a lot of those folks are not there yet. That's why you take a loan.
Sure. So there's a couple things. There's a couple things. So I know that there are statements from that from I don't remember his name about how student loan debt is preventing people from. It's like the #1 blockade between a millennial and getting a house. But I think that when people go back and they study that issue, I wish I had this offhand. I had this last night. But but we know this anecdotally. The #1 issue with millennials is that we all entered the job market in 2007, 2008, 2009. It was during the Great Recession. And that had a massive impact on our ability to get paid to get a house. I remember just anecdotally, I was working at a casino at the time, and I remember that the 401k matches were good. The cafeteria had hot food every day. They were there were so many different bonuses, and all of that got stripped away. And I don't remember any of it coming back when the economy started to pick back up again. Because of it, if they can take it, they can keep it. But so I don't believe that just giving all that money back. I think that the one that I was looking back last night, it was for every $10,000 in student debt or whatever, there was a 2% blockade from getting a house. It might be preventing some people from buying houses a little bit sooner, but it's hard to talk about houses because so much else is going on with them. For instance, right now, the price of housing is soaring ridiculously. If we compare how easy it was to get a house now versus a decade and a half ago, well, in 2005, your little brother that's 19 years old and cuts grass can get a house because literally anybody will write him a loan to buy a house. It's really hard to make those comparisons.
Well, I think that supports my argument because I can tell you this: the price of college and the amount of debt. This debt is not something that has been a part of American life for even 20.
That's is that a protein drink or something? Or a chocolate milk?
5 years. This debt has grown exponentially over the past 10, 15, 20 years, tops. The price of college has gone up 4 times in 35 years. And I can tell you, that's when I went to college. I went to college 35 years ago.
Some people in the chat are asking what he's drinking
the
too.
argument that you're making, this is targeted when we talk about student debt largely on that cohort of people that you're talking about. Everybody who has, graduated in the wake of the recession. So all of those problems that you're talking about, you can either say it's this may not be the primary reason in which there are less housing starts. There may also be because there's less the income trajectory has flattened too for these generation of people. But these are the people who need that type of relief, and it's targeted in that way.
Again, I don't think the income trajectory is flattened. I think it's higher than ever. I think that's one of the reasons why when we say that the debt is growing more and more and more, well, that's because 40 years ago, you didn't necessarily need a college degree to make it in the economy. Nowadays, that requirement is becoming higher and higher and higher. So of course you're seeing the student debt growing because more people are taking out money for a degree, but that's because the net present value of those degrees has just increased over time. And it's becoming one of these...
presume that.
People can say that they presume it, and people can cry on Reddit or whatever all they want, but people in the real world know. You know that if you only have a high school degree, if you don't have training, specialty for an electrician or a plumber in the trades, you are doing, even if we break it out into the 25th and 75th percentile of median earners, even that lower 25th percentile of people that have those 4-year degrees, so this is our gender studies, English, whatever people want to make fun of, even those people are making more money than somebody with just a high school graduation. And
when you break out those numbers racially, though, it doesn't add up in that way.
When you break out the numbers racially, yeah, there's still a disparity, but that disparity starts to shrink when you look at the difference between a black earner with a 4-year degree and a white earner with a 4-year degree versus a black earner with just a high school education and a white earner with a high school education. It doesn't disappear completely, but getting a 4-year degree is one of the few ways that black people are able to kind of catch up in terms of white earner. Not completely, of course, but it helps.
Again, I don't think anybody's arguing that people who get a college degree don't end up making more money. But the thing is, there's still massive student debt amongst a lot of people who choose to go to college, and erasing that student debt would help a lot of people, including a lot of black people.
Would you relieve all college debt by people who haven't graduated, or would you have a problem with that?
Yeah, no, I think there's a separate discussion because those people don't have any of the benefits of that college degree. I think it's fair to say that if you haven't graduated, then either a percentage or all of that gets forgiven because you're not reaping the rewards of it. I don't like the idea that the top 40% income households have 60% of the debt and the lowest income 40% of those households have 20% of the debt. That just doing a big stimulus and giving money back to people that have college degrees is just these are, I feel so to be a little personal, I'm somebody that has always hated the middle class because before I started making money online, I was working class. And as a working class person, the life that you live, actually living paycheck to paycheck versus what a middle class person deals with, where it's oh no, I've got to pay $500 a month on my student loan. It's going to take me a while. Meanwhile, I've got a nice apartment. I've got 2 cars for my family. I've got I don't think that those are the people that need the most help in society. People that are getting jobs as computer programmers and nurses and all that, I don't think they need the help. I think that this is one of the things I like the most about how Biden has been approaching stimulus. Rather than the Trump top down, it's literally are you poor? Are you working? Do you have a child? Is your gross income low? You're going to be the one that gets the money. And that's the kind of stimulus that has a super high multiplicative effect when it goes through society because these people spend money. They're not hoarding it. They're not sitting on it or just putting it in their Vanguard account, right? And 2, because these people are the ones where it's I can tell you $1,000 to me as a carpet cleaner means infinitely more than $1,000 to a guy that just took his bar exam. I don't care if he's black, white, Hispanic, or whatever. That money is just so much more valuable going into working class people. And if you have that degree, it's as good as gold. It really is so important. I know we like to mean that it's not, but we can look at a million different stats. You will never, ever, ever find a stat that shows that you're going to be worse off getting a college degree than not. The earnings of high school workers are lower and lower and lower. That productivity is not growing. Those earnings aren't growing. And the earnings of anybody with a four-year degree is getting higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. And it's becoming more of a has and has-nots when you look at like who has a degree and who doesn't.
Well, it's like, so what? It's not like these people are gonna be making like millions of dollars or anything. Like that's what I don't get. Like, yeah, they might be making more money, but it's not like that much more money, all things considered.
I mean, like again, we're getting back to an issue of, what's the alternative? It's not, I just don't see a situation where somebody is saying that Joe Biden does not have the ability to send that carpet, the pipe fitter, the carpet, cutter, $1,000 as opposed to this. I don't accept the premise that this is an either or situation, because I don't see what the alternative is in terms of what he can unilaterally do. You could argue from a political standpoint, again, I think there's probably maybe a slightly better argument there, although I'm not convinced that of the salience, or even that who would be making it on the other side, that if Joe Biden wasn't to unilaterally do this, then the Republican Party would sign off on legislation that would send $1,000 to those people. But also, again, this study, it's not comparing people within this. It is looking at
Look
the
at household wealth.
disparities.
Who cares? Student loans are
But
going to solve the wealth disparity.
If you're
What?
working class and your
Is
parents
he melting?
are millionaires, just to make it really explicit, you're in good shape. Your need to build assets is less because you're going to have a retirement. It's going to come from your parents when they die. Your need to worry about taking care of your parents when they start to get ill, when they have Alzheimer's, when they have high blood pressure, when they need to take medication, and to help them out, to make sure that they can pay rent at one point, is far less. That's an extreme example, but that is the dynamic that's at play here, and that's why I think it's legitimate to look at the question of progressivity
I think
as something like this.
we talk about like
with
parents dying though. This
wealth.
is like your parents dying that's a later life thing. My heart goes out to people that this affects, but like if your parents are dying when you're 22, that's like you're in a way different situation. Like parents dying, that's something that should come along.
when you're
Ideally,
22
when you're in your late 30s, maybe 40s, maybe 50s. Like if your parents are dying when you're like 22 years old and you have to give like student loan money back to them, I think that's a little bit of a separate argument
No,
in
it's
terms
not
of.
a question of. First of all, it's simply a question of preparing. Like, look, if if you're 20 years old and you know that your parents are millionaires, you don't have to worry about building assets. You can spend. You can spend every dollar that comes in. You don't have to put it into a 401k. You don't have to save it for retirement. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about putting money aside in case they need it because they need support. You don't have to worry about providing money for them because they just don't make enough because they didn't go to college. It's a different dynamic. I mean, I'm not, if there was an argument that there's two options on the table, one that would give $1,000 to, or even let's say, Medicare for all or college debt, I would probably go for Medicare for all. But the dollar figures that we're talking about are far less, when we talk about forgiving student debt. And, again, this is also, money that the government has lent, and it's not even, I just don't see the either or option here. I mean, if wealth, you don't perceive wealth as having an impact on someone's future life or current life and intergenerational wealth, then I can understand on some level why you perceive it that way. But in terms of like real living life, to have, I mean, look, when I was 20 or 23, I was making, $9,000 a year, and I was eating, exclusively Chinese food because I'm working at a Chinese restaurant. But to be honest, I wasn't terribly worried about my future in the way that, maybe someone else working there would have been, because I'm like, you know what? I can take chances because my dad's a lawyer. He's, and worst case scenario, I can move home. You know what I mean? Like that impacts your decisions. The wealth that existed within the context of my family provided me freedom and the ability to risk and a sense of like, at the end of my life, if I haven't been able to accumulate assets, then I'll be okay. And also, I'm not going to have to worry about like, paying for them. They're going to be fine, at least to a certain point in their age. So
Yeah, I guess it just depends on like, because like wealth is something that if you have so many years to acquire, it can grow so much larger than somebody else. Like, who do you think is going to have more trouble providing for their parents?
If you can put that money into assets,
but the problem is that like people have a really hard time, especially young people, understanding like what is wealth. Like to go back to the Bernie Sanders thing, like people say, "Oh, Bernie Sanders is a millionaire. He's got $1 million." Having $1 million when you're 80 is way different than having $1 million when you're 25. Like who is wealthier, right? When we have, say, you've just got a guy who's just working normal job, 30, 35 years old. His parents have $500,000 in the bank versus a guy that just graduated as a doctor whose parents are broke. Well, who's going to have more trouble taking care of their parents, right? The doctor guy, yeah, he's going to take a hit in the beginning, but the NPV, the net present value of that degree, those future earnings are huge. He might be screwed right there. If his parents get in a catastrophic car accident, he's 28, he's doing residency, yeah, maybe that guy will be screwed for a little bit. That one example, well, no, because it'd just be funeral that one, right? But like generally speaking, the guy that's graduating as a doctor or as a lawyer or as working for Amazon, Google, Facebook, it doesn't matter if the other guy that's working at a lawn service have parents that have saved away $500,000. That doctor or that lawyer or that managerial class person, he's going to outpace the other dude in a decade, and he's going to blow him away, and then his kids are going to be better off for it, and every part of his family and life is going to be better off for it.
But your presumption is that person is going to be able to build assets because they're not going to have the expenses associated with that. But they're going to have more. They're going to have more expenses associated with that, and also the family with wealth. I mean, that's the illustration of Bernie Sanders at that age, having accumulated that money when he's 80, versus the person whose parents, when they go to college, have that kind of money is the point. And so, when that person goes out and they graduate college, and their parents are going to help out with. Their parents are going to help out. Well, they've already helped out maybe a little bit with college. They don't have to take the same type of size of loans. But we also know that, like, okay, my kids, preschool. Well, we'll pay for your kids' preschool. We'll help you out with that, and you can put some money away. I mean, that's the dynamic. That is the implications of having this intergenerational wealth. Is you have help, you have subsidies that are there as you're getting older, and if in the absence of that, again, those dollars have
Destiny
to
does
do
look
more.
pissed.
I mean, it's the same concept of almost like of being poor is more expensive than being rich, because you have the ability to deploy your money in such a way that is more efficient when you're wealthy, because you have more control over it, you have more flexibility. It's same dynamic.
I mean, like, I understand everything you're saying, but I think that in a heartbeat, somebody with wealthy parents and poor parents and somebody that has a really good degree versus a high school education, I think you would trade out your wealthy parents for a better degree every single time, unless your parents are absolutely loaded.
Well, then why wouldn't you go get that degree?
Well, that's what people that go to school do, right?
No,
but
but
this is like that's actually a whole other different kind of problem too. Is that something that we've seen in other areas? So in the UK, when you look at education, when you make education free or discounted, sometimes that helps like people that are already doing pretty well even more, because it's not a matter of like the cost of going to school; it's the opportunity cost of not staying home and helping with family and doing that stuff as well. So you make like, say, I'm not against free college, but say you like make college free. The people that can take advantage of that, are the people that can just have a 4-year break in their life, go do that, their family is fine. Whereas people that are like working poor, that have to work to support their household, they can't take advantage of that free college. They actually need like a subsidy. They need to get like payment transfers to them in order to go to school. I think.
Well, but that I mean, that's consistent with what I'm saying. Like you just said that if you were, maybe I misheard you, but you said that I would rather be a guy with poor parents and get the degree than rich parents and not get the degree. But if you have rich parents, you have the ability to get the degree. You don't even need to take a loan. That's
We
the
keep
point.
saying that, but the reality is that 60% of the debt is held by the top 40% of like earners.
No,
Like-
no, but they're not earners yet.
But they will be. That's why you get the degree. Unless I mean, there's a separate conversation. Do we think that the degrees are like they're not actually going to make money, or because this is an argument that I hear a lot too. A lot of people
Not
seem
necessarily.
to be. A lot of these arguments. I'm not saying you're doing this, but it feels like a lot of the arguments are people saying like, well, these degrees are ultimately worthless.
Well, I think that there's enough data to show, at least up until this time, that the degree does help you for most people. It doesn't help in the same way for black people as it does for white people. There's a disparity there, but the income is just simply not as worth as much if you have more claims to that money. Right? Like you've got to look at like wealth to debt ratio to get an assessment of what your real lived experience is.
That's not. We don't even evaluate loans like that, like wealth to debt. You always look at income to debt, right? Like you're not just looking at like unless you're literally getting a secured loan.
If you get a mortgage, they're going to look at your wealth too.
They're going to look at your income.
No, they're going to look at your wealth, and I can assure you, they're going to look at your wealth and your liabilities, your assets, and your income.
Well, okay. I promise you that they're going to look at your income. They might look at
No,
some level of
I
wealth,
agree
but like that
they look
income
at
is going to be
they
the deciding factor, right? If you have really high wealth and no income, you're not going to get a mortgage, but they're going to make you pay cash for it or put down a huge down payment on it, like 50%. But if you have like really high income and not as much wealth built yet, especially if you're younger, they'll write you the loan. If you've got like a consistent income, you can show over like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. Income is absolutely the biggest factor, right?
Well, income might be a bigger factor in terms of getting a loan from work, but they certainly do look at wealth, of course. I mean, that plays into it significantly. If you have no money in your bank, I can assure you that you're not going to get that loan, and because you could lose that job tomorrow. But nevertheless, wealth to debt is it seems to me a better assessment of like of what your real lived experience is. But I mean, look, if at the very least, I think that like if it comes down to what is a better measure to progressivity, it's just a matter, I guess, of disposition on some level. I don't know if there is a right or wrong answer on that from a data perspective. It's just really just an experiential one. And
if it was possible to like flip a switch, I don't know if the Department of Education do that. I don't know how finance and control, but like for me, like I think having like income-based repayment or income-driven repayment feels like the obvious like best way. That if you come out of school and you're not making that much money, then your repayments are going to be structured. I think Australia, I think the UK does. I think a lot of countries do this, where as you earn more, then you start to pay back more if you need to, rather than just everybody is saddled with like a blanket debt. Would you be in favor of like that kind of like program if that was something that was like made the default instead of an opt-in in the US?
I mean, I would prefer debt relief. I think that would do, because I think with the income-based repayment, again, we're ignoring where people sit in the only issue for people is not just their income. It is the other assets that they have available to them, either ones they can anticipate in the future or ones that they have now, right? I mean, like, my pension is not something I have now. I don't have access to it. I can't access it until I'm 65, but it does provide me with a material benefit now, which is that I know I don't have to save. I only have to save X amount of dollars. And so, I think the problem with the income-based repayment, it's better than the payment structures that we have now, but it is less desirable, it seems to me, than debt forgiveness on both a drag on our economy and a drag on many people's ability to sort of like to live a better life. And also, I would say it's a detriment to our society insofar as like who's going into more, in my opinion, socially beneficial jobs, but are lower wage than others. So we're losing out on quality social workers and teachers because of certain debt. We're losing out on more public interest lawyers because of debt. I mean, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I don't think there's a
And
problem with like having like, and I think we already do this in parts of the U.S. where there are certain types of degrees that you get like reimbursed for depending on if you go into like public field work. I know that there
incidentally, that also was something that came up. There was a program that was specifically about that that we had. The 10-year public service program from 2007 to 2017. Those people graduate. They worked for 10 years in those jobs, which supposedly would have relieved their debt. And apparently, if you go to the consumer complaint registry in your state, you'll see that all these servicers have been engaging in massive amount of fraud. That's the other thing that is like we didn't even get to, was just like this is the servicers are just as despicable as they were during the financial crisis in 2007, 2008. And these loan servicers are really I think engaged. I mean, if you look at the consumer complaints, in a significant amount of fraud, it seems to me.
Sure, and that might be the case. I mean, there could be fraud in literally everything, right? There are people that fraudulently file tax forms.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, of course.
But
if that happens, that's bad, and it should be fixed, obviously, of course.
My experience during the but I also think it might be a little bit endemic. When you have servicers who are getting money based on fees and whatnot, the incentive structure is really messed up, it seems to me. But
yeah, it could be the case. What just on this thing when we talk about how like student loan debt has this drag on people's ability to live better lives and everything, and when it's like a drag on the economy, why do so many people still get degrees then?
You know what? I think there's a lot of people. Look, I've known people who work in the for-profit college industry, and I consider that business to be more or less a criminal activity.
Like working at private schools, or what do you mean?
No. Private colleges, the for-profit colleges. Excuse me.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of people who, particularly people who do not come from wealthy families, who may be first generation going.
The chat's like really confused.
Who are hoodwinked into these for-profit universities, and just simply don't have the savvy. They know that they sense that they need a college degree to go further in their career. And then they find that this college degree from blankety blank for-profit university isn't really worth much, or that they can't afford to maintain it. And so either they graduate and find that a degree does not pay off in the way that they think it's going to, or they get through a semester or two and realize they can't afford it, and then they're straddled with this debt that they don't have.
Yeah, if we're talking about like the unaccredited,
that's where like a libertarian would say like, oh well, that person, agreed to a contract and they got the degree, and it's not the college's fault that the degree is not worth anything.
like scam colleges or whatever. Well, I call them.
No, they're accredited. They're all accredited. They're accredited. That's why they wouldn't be eligible for public loans if they weren't accredited. I mean, the Obama administration made some headway in sort of like tightening what those credentials things, and then of course the Trump administration came in and blew it apart. If you want to look at something that goes even that performed even better than Jeff Bezos's rocket trip, take a look at like funds of for-profit colleges. Literally 15 minutes after the election was over in 2016, they shot up like this, like a trajectory like this. They have since come back down to earth in terms of the stock market, because the pandemic was also problematic for them too, I think, but counterintuitively. But
okay, sure. But getting away from like the I guess there might be some strange.
Well, that's a huge portion of these massive Fortune 500 public, I mean, for-profit universities, 95% of their income, their revenue, comes from student loans.
Sure, but when we
This
say
is a
huge portion, what I'm asking is like, do you agree that for the vast majority of people, 95% plus, like having a college degree does not represent a drag on their ability to live a better life, even with loans included? That the vast majority of these people, 95% plus, are coming out better, assuming they graduate, than when they went into it.
I don't know that figure. I would imagine it's higher. It's, you know, it's above 50%. Let's put it that way. I don't know if it's 95%, but we're not talking about we're not talking about the cohort of people who graduate college. We're talking about the cohort of people who take student loan debt.
Mhm.
And that includes people who don't graduate and people who've graduated, but may be positioned in society in a way that people who didn't have to take student loan debt and get a college degree are not, because 100% of your income can be deployed to, you know, after your basics, existence can be deployed to building assets over time. That's not necessarily the case if you don't come from wealth or you don't have a wealthy household. I mean, if you're married to, you know, someone who also doesn't have student loan debt, and you have two incomes there, obviously that makes a big, you know, difference as to how you can save. I mean, just as an example to when we talk about household wealth. But I got to go,
Okay.
and I think, like, we may not agree on this, but at least I feel like we you know, it's clear what the
Household wealth
delineation
versus
is.
the income thing, yeah. Okay. Well, hey, listen, I
Household
really
and
appreciate that.
intergenerational wealth. Yes.
Sure.
I'm sorry we didn't get to the men's rights.
Oh, no, I didn't care as much about that one. I was
Not
more
much
curious about the
to
college
say
one.
about that, frankly.
All right. Well, hey, listen, I appreciate the conversation. Where can people find you? Everybody knows who you are, but just in case.
Out on the street, Flatbush, more often than not.
All
They're
right.
right here. They can find me right there.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate the conversation.
All right, thanks.
It's like right over his shoulder.
I didn't think we'd get in the weeds so much on the wealth versus income thing. I thought that was a gimme. Did he move you
Right.
on something? No, I think
He thought that was a gimme? Okay. I guess this debate wasn't as like eventful or as exciting as previous ones, but I still think it kind of revealed a little bit the kind of arguments Destiny tends to lean to. Like, he seems to kind of parrot like the, you know, like the right wing takes and stuff. Like the oh, so some rich people will be affected by it, so we should just ignore the well, he claims that the majority of it is held by the majority of student loan debt is held by the wealthy, but that does not seem to be the case actually. Um, but anyway, I don't really have much else to say other than that at this point. Getting pretty tired, but I thought this was very similar to the Destiny versus Wolf debate, where you have like somebody who's actually pretty educated on this type of stuff, um, debating Destiny, who's a you know, just like a Twitch streamer, but at least Destiny's audience got a dose of true leftism. But that's gonna be it for tonight. It's like I'm having trouble thinking. I'm like getting pretty tired. So if you're watching this on Twitch, please hit the follow button. If you're watching this on YouTube, Please hit like and subscribe. Thank you very much. It's been fun. I hope everybody has a stellar night.